Your podcast can be more than just online content for your online business. In fact, when done well, your podcast can boost your business in many, many facets. But my favorite of them all is really up-leveling and upskilling and hacking yourself. Because when you're podcasting, you're learning up to 8 different skills. And who doesn't want to up-level while talking about one of their favorite things? I know I do. In case you haven't met, hi, I'm Anna Xavier. I'm the founder of the Podcast Space, where we teach podcasters how to grow a podcast, how to create a brand that is authentic to them, while you're just making sure that you're not stuck in imposter syndrome. So this episode is all about teaching you these 8 skills. If you are just starting a podcast, it's going to be super helpful for you to have a bigger awareness about what's possible. But if you have been podcasting for a while, it will actually open up your mind about all these different ways. So I cannot wait to dive in, so let's go. I'm really curious to know if you're going to be recognizing all of these 8, if that's something that you thought about, or if some of these are new to you. I chose to not include public speaking as part of these 8 skills because I think that is almost like too obvious. I don't know about you, but when I think about podcasting, I immediately think about someone becoming a better public speaker and that like skill absolutely developing. And of course, the outcomes are going to be based on a few things that I'm going to be talking about. So one, the willingness to improve. If you're not willing to improve, obviously you're not going to be seeing any of these skills that I'm going to be talking about. Self-awareness is huge to understand where you were and where you're going, also where you are right now. That's actually one of the reasons why I suggest to clients to never delete their first episode, because that is such a great reminder of how far you've come. Number 3 is listening back. Not enough podcasters listen back to their episodes. I always listen to my own. And also, actually, it's so great to give you a little bit of grace in your learning journey, because so many times we're recording content, and if we don't listen to it, if we have an editor that we are sending out content to, and you're like, la, 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 I don't even want to hear it, well, you're missing out on actually learning about either things that you can improve or things that you actually didn't realize were not that bad. Like, personally, I always think about like how fast I speak. I definitely speak fast, and I'm always trying to speak a bit slower just because that's my regular speaking pattern. But I know that a lot of you tell me that you have to listen to the episodes multiple times because I just go through it so fast. That's something that I've been working on for a while. I have that awareness when I'm editing, but also a lot of things that I'm thinking about is I'm always constantly thinking, oh man, I took so long to think about that word, especially as I am a non-English native speaker. A lot of times I'm stuck on like, oh my gosh, what's the word? But in my head, I think that it's been like 20 minutes. Of course, not 20 minutes, but like 3 seconds. And it's only been like maybe 1 or 2. And I'm building it up in my head. And as I'm editing myself or listening back, I'm like, oh, actually, that wasn't that bad. So it's good for you to have that awareness like, hey, I'm actually improving. Like, it wasn't that bad. And then last but not least, hiring a podcast coach for whatever need you have. I feel like that's something that you absolutely need to do at some point in your career as a podcaster to up level. Whether that's someone who has who needs to help you with some sort of speech issue, or someone who needs to get you out of your head. I hear a lot of podcasters who struggle with imposter syndrome, who want to sound more confident, or even someone who is wanting to help you really hone in the type of content that you need to be talking about, because it just feels like you're talking about all these things and you're really not sure you're the expert for those. But even just mastering these 8 skills, some of these things like willingness to improve, self-awareness, listening back, and hiring a coach at some point when you need one, that is really truly the best way to utilize the skills that we're going to be talking about in a second, or at least to earn them out. So let's start with improvisation skills. So hosting and co-hosting a podcast will absolutely improve your improvisation skills because you'll be put out in unexpected scenarios. You'll be having to create stuff from scratch, right? None of us is born with the ability to create podcast content. You have to think about how to start the podcast, how to flow into the questions, how to close the show. All of these things you have to learn. You need to learn how to improvise, to digress from script. Sometimes you messed up, and so you want to make sure that you're fixing that on the fly, and maybe you don't want to do it and recording it multiple times. So you will just eventually become really good at kind of deviating from script. By the way, if you want, you should absolutely try to do things in bullet points and sections instead of like whole paragraphs. It's easier and you will mess up less times. If you want to start like dipping your toes in improvisation, and then asking unplanned questions just helps you get more in the spur of the moment, and as well as like thinking on the spot, right? Like making the connection between something that your guest said or your co-host said, and bridging that with the next question, or bridging that with the topic if you went off topic. So the more you do it, the more it will be kind of like natural, it will be easier, and you'll recognize an opportunity to kind of like go off the script. Now, of course, you want to consider, well, I'm really confident hosting a podcast now. What is my next level if I want up level? Well, probably if you're recording a podcast, going live will be the next thing. I do not recommend people to right away go and live stream podcasts, especially if you're not techie. In case you didn't know, I produce podcasts, not just like on site. I did live radio, but I've also worked as a producer for live stream podcasts. And I've definitely seen that the people that were the best long-term and really learned and kind of hone in their personal style were the ones who took the time to, learn something, kind of master it, and then move to the next thing. Like people who were just like, I'm just going to go live and see what happens. It was painful to watch because they were really stressed out. They didn't really shine. It didn't do them any good in terms of just like putting them in, in a comfortable and comfortable level. So basically it was just like too fast, too soon. So be mindful of that. Okay, let's move into interpersonal skills. At some point in my life, I worked in the nonprofit world, and we used to work with young people. And so one of the research that we did was that young people really struggled with interpersonal skills. And not just young people today, but a lot of people today struggle with that. Not just in like professional scenarios, but in social scenarios, there's a lot of anxiety. And if you feel like you are in a time where like you really want to improve and be more confident when you're meeting new people, I mean, what a better way than to get yourself in front of like strangers when you're interviewing them? Because let's be honest, like even if you do prepare a podcast interview with a guest, you are still meeting a stranger, and it takes time to build rapport. So it's an excellent exercise to just get comfortable really fast with a stranger and carry a conversation. But normally also, like if you're inviting someone on your show, you probably know a little bit about the topic yourself. So it kind of like throws yourself into this like, again, comfortable, uncomfortable zone where you know some of it. You're not completely like, oh my gosh, I know nothing about this. Who's this person, right? All right, moving into interviewing and listening skills. My goodness, this is absolutely my favorite one because podcasters are good conversationalists, but also they have to at some point become really good listeners. And again, of course, this is not the case to those people who just have other people in and they just go through their list of questions. They don't really engage. That's like, tell me about this. Okay, moving on to the next question. Okay, tell me about this. Okay, thank you very much for coming in, right? Like nobody wants to hear this. But I feel like you can take this approach in two different ways. One is to say, okay, I'm going to lead with curiosity. And I'm not going to think that any question is dumb or that there's any silly interjection. Like everything is fair game. Because you're asking from the perspective of your audience, right? Like even if you're an expert on some of these things, you also have an awareness about what your community needs from these podcasts, like what your community wants to hear from this person. And so when you're going for that perspective, you truly are in the curious state. And so there's less judgment and you're just really listening because there's a question that pops up out of like that conversation, that question, some story that was said. And so I don't think enough people think about these simple questions that you can ask. Oh, tell me about that. When your guest is getting really excited or when your co-host is getting really excited about something, tell me more about that or what happened next. Like those are such great questions to ask because you're not killing momentum. And let's say you're asking someone something and you have to think like for 2 more seconds because let's say you're closing the show and you're trying to remember something, like gives you extra time to actually make it flow a bit more easily. So you want to make sure that whenever you're talking to someone else, you're really listening in, but thinking about it from the, hey, this is not about me, right? Like, this is about me and my listeners having a good time. And I feel like the issue becomes when the host just feels like, oh my gosh, I need to be the authority on this, and I always need to have the last word. This just hurts your the quality time that you have with your guest. And so much of the magic of podcasting is to provide a fantastic experience from both ends, from both you being the guest and the other person being the host, right? So basically, you have to make sure that this person is having a good time. If you were sitting in, a restaurant or in a cafe and talking to this person, like, you would not talk over them. Like, it's about giving them space, and that is a skill of learning how to talk to people. If you're asking yourself, like, how do you build trust with a stranger from the get-go? Well, you just simply go from using the prep time. You should never sit down with a stranger and just go straight to the episode. Like, at least have some chit chat. Like, oh my gosh, comment on something nice that they have, like something like their lipstick or their shirt looks cool or their setup looks neat. It's just everyone wants to hear a nice thing, right? So what a better way to use that prep time to become a better conversationalist, which is like, just find cues, things that they're excited about. And that's actually something that you can even bring to the interview and add as another element of like, oh, when we were talking before we started recording, you mentioned something about this. And it got me thinking, and then you search whatever it is. And it just proves that you were listening and paying attention. Last but not least, you learned so much about body language. So in terms of, interviewing skills, it's so important to notice if the person is leaning in and looking really excited, or if the person is looking like they couldn't care less about what you're saying. I feel like a lot of times your guest is telling you what they need, which is like, for instance, you hurrying up the interview or you making sure that you are not interrupting them. That's a huge mistake that I see people say, like, oh my God, wait, I need to ask you about this. And you're constantly interrupting them, so they can start getting really like closed off. Maybe they kind of like tense up. So what is the body language of your guest telling you? You will start to notice so many more details about this person that you're interviewing, that you're speaking to, and you'll be like, oh my gosh, like, when I am in social settings, I now pick up on all of these things. Let's get into networking skills. I know that there's no like middle ground. There's people that love networking, people that hate networking, people that really detest networking are normally like, I hate going. There's too much pressure to going to events and trying to like meet people, and it feels very forced. Like, when you are on a podcast, you're really improving your chances of meeting high quality people and improving the time that you have with them, finding common ground, because again, the quality of your network is your net worth. And what this means is, if you're surrounded by people who are not really seen, who are not doing, and by to be seen, it means like you don't even need to be always showing up on LinkedIn, but it can be someone who doesn't even have a website and who doesn't create educational content. Or if people that are surrounded by friends who never mention their name to anyone. Like, if you're podcasting for its networking potential, that's a skill that you will absolutely develop. And it's funny because I hear from clients too that they're like, wow, like, I really feel so confident when I'm networking with people because of all of these guests that I had on my show. I feel like when I'm showing up to networking events, I just feel a lot more at ease because I had all of these practice in an environment where I felt, safe, and where I felt like there was like less pressure. And so that's something that is important to know if you don't like the regular events. So again, a network that is worthy is, for instance, like, you're having guests on your podcast who are doing really exciting things, who would be in an event and mention your name, who are proactively engaging with you on different levels other than just like, hey, I need this, and you're like, you have the solution, right? So podcasting really opens up your capacity to network in different ways, but also to network more confidently. And if you're still struggling with the concept of networking and why it's important, think about this. The more your network grows, the more people you can positively impact in the world. So if nothing, that is the beauty of podcasting. That's the beauty of really working on a fantastic strategy for your network. Now we're moving into pitching skills. Yep, pitching. Not everyone feels confident pitching. Not everyone wants to pitch. But the truth is that when you are podcasting, you are constantly pitching stuff and ideas and concepts to your listeners. You are influencing them, right? So, for instance, in this episode, I am influencing you and pitching you the importance of learning and mastering these concepts when you're podcasting, stuff that maybe you never thought about. And so, basically, when you're thinking about the concept of pitching and understanding that every single episode you're pitching one idea to your listeners, whether that's like direct or indirect, it just makes the concept a lot easier to digest, because I feel like a lot of people think about like pitching as like almost like a hard sale. Does not need to be. I also want you to consider the amount of content that you are pitching to your audience. Think about the amount of episodes you've recorded so far. It just proves that you are really good at pitching at some point, because you've talked about all of these different things and you've successfully gotten like feedback from listeners. You've been able to get a lot of visibility online through those. So these are just things that you may not think about, but do happen when you podcast. Another thing that I don't think enough people think about is that when you're podcasting about your expertise, you're actually pitching your skill set to a new lead, and you're pitching your services. I do this all the time on this podcast. Sometimes I do it in a direct, and sometimes I do it in an indirect way. So the idea that pitching can be, kind of something that you get really good at is something that when you're thinking about it, you're like, wow, every time I'm creating a podcast episode, I'm releasing content to maybe, 1,000 listeners, 100 listeners, and you're doing these pitching constantly, and you're just up-leveling that skill that you never thought you had it in you, or at least to this level. This is a given. Technical skills. Obviously, when you're podcasting, you learn so many more technical things. Whether you're just learning, recording yourself, taking photos for your headshot if you're still doing it yourself. You're also learning how to edit, research skills when you're looking for topics. You also become really tech savvy in, if you're wanting to stream, upload. You learn so many new tools in such a short period of time that actually it impacts your future capacity at learning software, because you've just been learning all of these. Like if you're doing audio only, you're moving into video at some point, so that's a different skill set. Or if you are, paying someone to edit your podcast or paying someone to market your podcast, you're still learning how to engage in technical terms, because at some point your podcast producer may say, hey, like your microphone had this issue and that issue. So you technically become better at that skill. Obviously, let's not forget about breathing and mic etiquette. You just become, again, like, have you realized the amount of skills you've built so far? It's truly impressive. And last but not least, project management skills. Obviously, your podcast, it's a marathon. You have to work, whether you're working in a series or in episodic content, you will learn how to time manage and collaborate with other people if you have an editor and all of these, right? Like you will need to create all of these ecosystem in order to be able to publish consistently. So don't underestimate how many skills you're learning. Okay, to recap, all the skills they're learning apart from obviously public speaking: improvisation skills, interpersonal skills, interviewing and listening skills, networking skills, pitching skills, technical skills, and project management skills. You've mastered all of these, at least to some level, if you've done a podcast for at least 3 months. So that is incredible. And so this podcast episode definitely shows you that there's so much more to your podcast than just talking, than just content, right? Before we go, I just have to tell you how proud I am for you to learn all of these things, but also to show up even when things are not perfect, even when you're still struggling to learn things, but you're still pushing through. So many podcasters give up before, they actually start to see any solid growth. And I totally understand, because there's a lot to it, right? Like I talked about all of these different skills that you are learning, but the truth is sometimes it's hard to do it yourself. So if you are wanting to get support on that, you can always reach out to me on Instagram and also at thepodcastspace.com. All the resources mentioned in this podcast will be available at thepodcastspace.com/ podcast. And I can't wait to hear your ahas. I know that you're working so hard to grow your podcast, and every single action that you're taking today will absolutely make a difference in 10 months' time, 10 days' time. Just continue creating content that is imperfect but moves you forward. I'll talk to you on the next episode.